How's this for a job? You get to see pretty much any play you want to, on somebody else's dime, then tell hundreds of thousands of people what you thought about it. Sounds good, eh? Well, that's exactly what Richard Ouzounian got to do for the Toronto Star for 15 years. It was a wrap for Richard last December when he retired from the Star, and he joins us tonight to share some of those memories. Welcome back to TVO, first of all.
Thank you, Steve.
Got to remind everybody that you were the head of arts here.
Right, from 95 to 2000.
And
I
left
went
here
from
to go to the
here
Star.
to go to the Star.
Fantastic. So it's nice to see you in the building
Great
again.
to be back.
How many plays do you estimate you have seen during that 15 years?
Oh my God, we calculated in a slow year it was 200, sometimes it went up to 300. So you figure it was around 2,500 to 3,000, somewhere in there, yeah.
You can't possibly remember all of them, can you?
No, in fact, I started going through my files. I did keep, once I started at the paper, every time I'd do a review, I'd wait till it got online the next day and I'd save the internet file. And I went through a bunch of them and I went, did I see that? Did I write that? Because there'd be periods where you'd be doing, 7 nights in a row.
And it left no impact unless it
No,
was
sometimes, yeah, if it's really good or really bad, you remember it. But there's a lot of the, oh yeah. I mean, people would come to me and say, you reviewed me. And I went, I'm sorry. Maybe you had a hat on? I don't know.
Any idea how many different cities you saw plays in?
That's easier to get down because there's not that many. I mean, you do Vancouver, Chicago, New York, Montreal, Toronto, London, Las Vegas, all the Cirque du Soleil shows and things like that.
Right.
So there aren't that many theater cities in the world, and I must say Toronto is one of the best.
Mm-hmm. Were there many occasions when you were in the middle of watching a play and you said to yourself, this is such a piece of garbage and I'm never going to get this 2.5 hours of my life back again?
I'd like to quote another friend of mine who's a theater critic in New York, and he had been through a night like that where he saw a 5-hour play that was awful, and he went into the local hangout, and the owner said, boy, Peter, you work hard. And he said, no, my father was a plumber. He worked hard. And, I have to say that even though sometimes you complain and think, oh, it's a bad show, and oh, I had to, take the streetcar for 55 minutes to the west end of the city to sit in the basement with 2 people and see a bad piece of theater, it's still a heck of a way to make a living.
That's a great perspective, right?
Yeah, I hope
There's no
so.
heavy lifting in your job, is
Not
there?
at all.
Yeah.
No. Mentally.
Mentally heavy lifting. Well, what on those days where you might have seen, let's say you'd seen 3 or 4 or 5 or even 6 bad plays in a row, what kept you going back?
The surprise, because every now and then there'd be one you didn't even have any idea would be on the radar. My favorite surprise night ever, I remember in the middle of a deadly winter like this, walking into Tarragon's Extra Space on a Tuesday night to see a new play by a new woman named Hannah Moscovich.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And it was called Easter Berlin. It was astonishing. I came out 90 minutes later and went, I've just seen the great new Canadian playwright. And I couldn't wait to rush out and write that up and get people to go see it. And when I found out that by 4 o'clock the next day it was sold out thanks to that review, I felt I had done some good.
So your reviews did have impact. You got tangible evidence that what you wrote mattered.
Yeah, I mean, and on the big scale, for example, at Stratford, one year they weren't ready when I gave their big musical a phenomenal notice and the phone lines crashed the next day. From then on, they were ready with extra phone lines in case the review was really good, because they literally could do that. The Mervishes have said that, a really good review for me could mean up to 7 figures more revenue. But on the other hand, if in a little theater where you have no money to advertise, that's where it really made the difference. I mean, when Hannah later said to me, my play sold out by 4 o'clock in the next afternoon because of your notice, thank you. That's the other part. And it's true, people did read you and listen to you. Not everybody believed me. I was going to say I had the emails to prove otherwise.
But was the flip side also true, meaning that if Richard Ouzounian hated a play and said so, the thing might have closed way before it ought to have?
Yeah, sometimes it could. And that's the responsibility you have to bear. It's like, oh dear, these people tried really hard, but it was really bad. And I can't lie, there's one of my colleagues in the city who remain nameless. I call him the boy who cries sheep, because he's always saying everything is pretty good. That's worthy. It has promise. And so no one really believes him after a while.
Okay, name names. Who are you talking about?
No, wouldn't do that.
Okay. Were you ever able, I'm assuming somewhere in there you actually went to a play that you weren't working and you were just there, quote unquote, as a civilian watching a play. Did that ever happen?
It did, not as often as you'd think, but there'd be times I'd be on a trip to New York and I'd know that the Star didn't want, a whole package of things, or I'd be in London and know that there was no reason for the Star to publish a review of this, but I wanted to see it anyway.
So were you capable of actually watching a play as a civilian as opposed to a reviewer?
Steve, here's the secret. I always went into the theater as a civilian. I went in as somebody who loves theater, and I'd sit there, and for about the first 45 minutes, I'd say, okay, show me the play. And I would say, this is good, this is not so good. And then around the end of the first half, going into intermission, the critic brain would click in. Okay, now I know what this is like. Why is it like this? And what am I going to tell people? But I honestly would sit there and go, please, God, let it be good, and wait for it to happen to me and pray it would work.
Well, that's interesting because the assumption is you critics like to go to shows and you hope they're awful because, of course, skewering a play can bring out your creative juices better than, say, an average play or even a great play can.
Well, yeah, you can write funny lines, but on the other hand, when a new play especially would open, it would be great, and I'd get the review in print, online, and I'd go to bed, I would have this little contented feeling thinking, tomorrow morning, the readers of the Star will open their paper and read something new and surprising. The people connected with it will get a boost to their careers. The theater will get some help. It was like sending out waves of good energy. Believe me, that's a lot better than having a couple of really good one-liners.
Do you know whether that's because it was you writing it or because it happened to be in the Star?
Very good question. Combination of the two, I believe. The Star is the biggest circulation paper in the city. It gives
in the country.
That's true. And it gives great credence to entertainment. It's always had a strong entertainment section, and it gives things good play. But even in the Star's history, there have been critics who have been more influential than others. It's a combination, as was it Churchill said, the man in the moment?
Yes.
You have to do the two together.
Gotcha. Well, of those 2,500 to 3,000 plays, we're now going to find out how many of them you in fact do remember, and let's go through the good, the bad, the ugly, the fantastic, et cetera, et cetera. And I can't ask you, obviously, what was the best play you saw, because that just doesn't break it down enough. So let's break it down into categories. Richard, the best musical you ever saw?
Ooh. That's tough because our Canadian people do musicals great. But if I had to think back to one night, it would be a few years ago now when West Side Story opened at Stratford. Because not only was it a terrific West Side Story, but I knew I was seeing the birth of two stars that night, Shalina Kennedy and Paul Nolan, who are both Canadians raised out of here, came up through the ranks. And sure enough, Shalina is starring on Broadway. Paul is in between shows at the moment, but has starred in 2 Broadway shows. They're like and they're wonderful people. It was a great show. It was great for Stratford. It was great for everybody.
Best dramatic production?
For a lot of reasons, it would be the show that Soul Pepper opened their new theater with, Our Town.
Ah, okay.
Because it's a beautiful play. It's about community, about theater, about all these good values we need to be reminded of, but also because it was the fulfillment of Albert Schultz's dream that he was going to have a theater in the city, of the community. And the best part is, I can tell you now, a decade afterwards, he's lived up to that promise. I still think Soul Pepper is doing its job better than any other theater in Toronto.
Best comedy you ever saw?
When did I laugh the most? Dame Edna. From every time, Dame Edna's been here 3 times, every time she convulses me, but that very first time, I didn't know what I was in for, and I mean, my cheeks hurt when I left the theater.
Most disappointing production. You went to the theater, you had great expectations, and they were dashed.
I don't think I'm alone when I tell you this. Lord of the Rings, the musical. We all had great hope for it. We wanted it to be terrific. And in fact, some of us had even been allowed into early rehearsals in the rehearsal hall where you could see the potential. But then it got on that stage and the technical mass of it all just choked it. And it got lost and it was nothing. And I think that was probably the biggest disappointment ever.
You may have answered this already with Hannah Moskowitz, but how about the other side of the coin, which is you went expecting absolutely nothing and you were blown away?
Well, there have been a lot of cases like Hannah's play. Rosa Laborde did another play called Leo that was wonderful. sometimes you pop up, and Buddies in Bad Times would have a lot of astonishing shows over the years. Andrew Kushner is a wonderful new writer. His latest play, Wormwood, at Tarragon, I went, wow, where did that come from? You know, I knew he was good, but who knew he was in that direction? Or you'd go to see Mitchell Cushman's company, Outside the March, where they did some incredible shows like Terminus and Passion Play, and you were just blown away by them.
I noticed you haven't mentioned on your list so far any of the, like the real boffo hits. You haven't mentioned Phantom of the Opera or Les Miserables. How come?
Well, because like to do a great production of Les Mis here is kind of an exercise in what I'd call Mick theater. You know, somebody else did it, and you're now they devised the Big Mac, and you're now duplicating the Big Mac. It doesn't mean it's not good. And I was thrilled to see Ramin Karimloo here, and of course I love Colm Wilkinson. You know, I worked on that first Phantom. You know,
right.
But they don't do much for the love of the city eternally. You know, Mamma Mia was a great time, but I'd rather see us do our own production.
Gotcha. How about your own reviews? I presume, you know, from time to time you look back at reviews of things that you have written in years past. And do you ever say, boy, I actually, with a chance to think a little further on this, I think I might have got that one wrong?
Well, you know, this may sound egotistical. I don't think my judgments were ever wrong, but I think sometimes I express them too strongly. The one that and I later apologized for this in print. A few years ago, Stratford did Romeo and Juliet. By all accounts, it wasn't a good production. I'm not the only one who didn't like it. But I came down crashingly on Daniel Briere, the young man who played Romeo. Unfairly so. And I took a lot of flack for it at the time, but you know, I went, no. But I later watched him come back and play smaller roles and develop as an actor. And I actually wrote him an apology in my review of Anthony and Cleopatra.
Did he accept it?
I don't know.
Well, you didn't hear back from him?
Nope, that's not why I did it.
Why do you think you were overly harsh on him to begin with?
Well, I was disliking the production so much, and of course, when you dislike Romeo and Juliet, your dislike usually falls on Romeo because he's harder to play than Juliet. And I think I took all of my feelings against the production and aimed it at the actor, which I should know enough not to do.
But you did.
I did.
And you still feel bad about it, I can tell.
Absolutely.
Huh. Have you got in any of your reviews over the years a particularly, as you look back at it, wow, Richard, that was a clever line. How did I think of that? And if you did, what's the line?
I think it was just recently when Sherlock Holmes passed through town and David Arquette played Sherlock Holmes. And I said two things about him. I said, one, his idea of being British is your bachelor uncle flouncing around the living room after one too many cosmopolitans. And I also said, despite the fact that his leading lady looked like Vanna White, he never tried to purchase a vowel from her, and his speech remained a mush of consonants all night.
Nice, nice. Now, where does that come from?
I don't know. I mean, I really do. People think, do you plan these? Because, you know, I usually wrote all of my reviews in a half hour. They used to have to get into print the next day, but then they had to get in online the same night. So I would either leave the theater, if it was possible, and go home, or sometimes I'd be in a corner of the lobby of the theater or a Starbucks or Second Cup nearby and write the review. If you saw me carrying my laptop to the theater, it meant I knew it was long and I had to write it then and there. But all of those reviews, ranging up to 750 words, came out in 30 minutes.
Did you take notes during productions?
No, that's something I'm proud of. I never take notes unless it is a brand new play and I wanted to write down a line of dialogue to illustrate what the writer did right or wrong. My feeling is if I can't remember it long enough to write it, what am I doing? And if I'm writing notes, how can I be an audience member?
Did you ever run into your colleagues at the Globe or the Sun or the National Post or any out-of-town papers for that matter and kind of compare notes or anything like that?
Our rule is that we never discuss the show at intermission. Unless sometimes it is so appallingly horrible that you have to do it. But we talk afterwards, usually after they've written their notices. I do know one great exception. When everybody came up to Toronto to see Lord of the Rings, and we were at the Critic's performance, and Ben Brantley from the New York Times shared a taxi with me as we were leaving, and we were silent because we were both horrified. And we drove for 10 minutes, and then Ben turned to me and said, "How many nuns do you think went blind sewing Galadriel's hat?"
And that was your first hint that
was the first
maybe
hint.
he didn't like it either.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Okay. Richard, having seen so many plays, Have you had enough?
No.
You're still going to go to plays?
Oh, I've still been going to plays. I go now only to the ones I want to go to. I don't have to rush home. I was at Gaslight just the other night at the Ed Mirvish Theater, and I started to get up and race up the aisle like I used to and realized I didn't have to. And as Pam and I were walking to the car, I said, guess what I don't have to do? And she said, write about it.
Right. I want to take you, though, back to last December, and I was there the same night you were to see Phantom of the Opera, and there you were in your seat, knowing that this would be the last time that you'd get to write about something that you saw on the stage. What was that like?
A little sad, a little relieving, kind of happy it was Phantom, because Phantom was the show that brought me back to Toronto in 1989 to work on it. And it's been kind of a benchmark for Toronto theater. And everybody loved that original production here, and it ran 10 years. And I think I wanted to see, where is Toronto today? And a not that great tour came through town, and it sold out in advance, because it's still running as we speak, because everybody wanted to see it. But people aren't liking it because Toronto has grown up, and Toronto knows what's good. That original production of Phantom was good. This revival isn't.
This reviewer is going to take issue with you. I'm going back to see it a second time, mostly because I've got a little kid who
never saw the original.
Well, who missed the original and is spellbound. She's seen it once already, and she wants to see it again.
Well, that's fair.
So we're going a second time.
I mean, that's what you have to remember. I mean, one of my fellow critics at another paper loved The Diary of Anne Frank at Stratford last summer, and I didn't, because they mucked around with it, in my opinion. And I said, but haven't you ever seen this before? And he said, no. And I went, that's why. Because The Diary of Anne Frank itself is so powerful. It can overcome an itsy production. Same thing with Phantom, I guess. Phantom has its power.
It does.
It does.
I would like you to look at the monitor right up there.
Okay.
And who's that, Richard? That's you.
That's me.
That's you leaving the theater, having just seen Phantom of the Opera, having just seen the last play that you are going to review. What was going through your head as you walked out of the theater and I snapped that picture of you?
You know, it occurred to me that it was the end of my reviewing career. It was the end of everything. And I remembered, I thought, let me tie it all up and find a way to say it in review. And the last line of my review was in my head, which was, it's over now, the music of the night.
Beautiful. That's a great line. That's such a good place to end this interview. I have one more question, but I almost don't want to ask it because that's such a lovely place to end it, but I'm going to try anyway. Because this is a little bit heavy. You know, you've written so many things over the years, and a lot of people cared and had a big stake in what you thought of their production. And you've told us about already, about, you know, a good review from Richard Ouzounian could make a big difference. Are you personally ready for the emotional letdown of going to the theater and people don't have to care about what you think about their plays anymore?
Well, you know what's interesting is that I already have had to go see some shows that friends of mine or acquaintances of mine had done where they specifically have asked me to go because they want my opinion or they need my advice, and they just want me there because they like my presence. They know I can't write anything or print anything, but it's part of your life. You know, you don't walk away from it. To me, it wasn't like, oh, I'm doing the shipping news and now I won't do the shipping news anymore. I've been going to the theater since my parents took me to see Mary Martin and Peter Pan when I was 4 years old. I'm not going to stop going to the theater just because I'm not getting paid to see the plays.
Bravo.
Thank you.
That's good. I'm glad I asked that question. That's good. Richard Ouzounian, former theater critic for the Toronto Star. So good to have you back in the building, Richard. Great
Glad
to see you
be
again.
here.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.